This is Indian History Thali by Thali, where we ask archaeologists and historians how they know what they know about India's past. In this series, we will focus on Indian history through the lens of food. We call the Gupta period a golden age, but golden for whom? And does the food back that up? But let's start with who were the Guptas? The Guptas are a ruling dynasty who controlled much of northern and central India for close to 200 years. Many have called the Gupta period a golden age. There was political stability, at least for the empire's core regions. Trade flourished and gold coins flowed through elite hands. Kings funded scholars, poets, and scientists. This was the age of Aryabhatta, Kalidasa, and big ideas. Art reached new heights in caves, temples, and sculpture. Sanskrit became the language of power and prestige, and much of what we call classical India took shape here. In this video, we ask historians Kunal Chakrabarti and Kanad Sinha about the Gupta period and what might have been on their thalis. This classical age seems so marvelous, but if you had to pick one image as an emblematic symbol of the Gupta period, which one would it be?
Udaygiri temple complex is constructed by Chandragupta II himself, and many of his officers are donating there, like Shavavira Sena, who was his minister, and Shanokanika, one of the powers Samudragupta subjugated, and now they were loyal allies of Chandragupta II. It symbolizes so many things of the Gupta period. On one hand, it's a Vaishnava image. It symbolizes the religious shift, that culture of temple building which is coming up, state patronage to Brahmanical religions, particularly Vaishnavism, which is the official religion of the Guptas. All these things are there. But also this Varaha is an anthropomorphic Varaha, unlike the ones at Iran and Ramagiri, because it symbolizes the king also. So the king is the protector of the earth personified, Bhudevi, whom Varaha rescues. And it is from Chandragupta II's time that in literature, particularly in Kalidasa's Raghuvangsha, you would see that the king is frequently compared to Vishnu as the husband and protector of Shri and Bhu, the two forms of Lakshmi, that is the royal wealth and the royal territory. And not just a royal symbol, to earmark the Gupta kings as the emblem or as a personification of Vishnu on earth. There are two artistic innovations in this image. One is, though Varaha only rescues the earth, he has nothing to do with serpents. But this Udaygiri Varaha has a serpent, a Naga, under its feet, because the Nagas were the biggest adversaries of the Guptas. So subjugation of the Nagas is shown, and also the new political culture. That Asher had pointed out that in front of Varaha, whose image is gigantic, there are many small figures in front of Varaha, showing their respect to Varaha. They are supposed to be sages, but their dress is like that of the subordinate rulers of the Guptas. Though they are supposed to be sages, they are dressed up like royal functionaries. Whether you call it feudal or a new kind of political formation where a patron-client relationship is coming up, the Guptas are shown as overlords having underlords. That relationship is also depicted in that image.
It appears as though the Guptas were not only mighty warriors who established new forms of political rule, but were also great patrons of the arts and culture. But what does it mean to truly call an age golden?
There was a tendency among historians to call this period as the Golden Age in early Indian history. But as we know, that this term is misnomer, and it's in terms of material culture that the differences were very, very wide, and we know a little bit of that. Right? Our sources primarily refer to the activities of the rich and the powerful. But from the archaeological reports now, we begin to see that a city had, let's say, two parts. right? A part where the drainage system was much better, their houses were much better constructed, where the utensils that were found were sort of had far greater finesse than that other, the poorer part of the city or the town, where the drainage is poorer, the rooms are smaller, the pottery, mostly of terracotta, are of coarse grained rather than fine, and so all of that goes to show that the difference in the material culture not merely existed but was very marked, right? And the other reason why we cannot say any period as golden is, for example, this efflorescence in art and culture, right? How many people of the society had access to it, keeping in mind that the non-dvijas and the women were debarred from learning Sanskrit. What's the point of telling them that Kalidas was producing great poetry in Sanskrit when they were not allowed to listen to it, right? And so on. Similarly, art and other things. Therefore, now historians would, find it easier to call it the classical period, keeping in mind the excellence achieved rather than a golden age.
So, if stark disparity existed in society, what about the thali? What do sources tell us about what people were eating during the Gupta period?
What we get to know about the Gupta period is that it was a period of agrarian expansion.
Yes.
And it seems from all accounts that the staple diet was rice. Now, it must have been for the upper classes, it must have been for the poor. Although we do not have any particular text or inscription where it is stated specifically that there's a distinction in what you can or what you cannot eat. Of course, the Smriti texts tell you what you can eat and what you cannot eat. For example, there are certain restrictions on what a Brahmana could eat or not eat, and so on. And theoretically, for example, the Shudras could eat everything, except that they did not have access to those foodstuff, right? And one doesn't even know whether they had adequate access to rice, which was the staple food. We get to know about the food items in the Gupta period from a number of sources. For example, fruits. There are references to orchards in the land grant inscriptions, right? Either a mango orchard has been given as part of a village to the Doni, usually a Brahmana, right? So that kind, or a set of arecanut trees marking the eastern boundary of the plot of land that has been given to the Doni. So that kind of reference occur in the inscriptions. The poetry of Kalidas, right? In the Meghaduta, for example, there are references to Jambuvana, right, which is a berry forest, let's say. There are references to bananas, kadali, and so on. They ate meat. How do we know? Almost all the Gupta kings issued coins where they are portrayed as hunting. Now, hunting was for fun. Hunting was sport, surely. But hunting was also for food. And since there are references to Vedas or professional hunters who usually belonged to the very low castes, part of what they got, obviously they consumed themselves, but part of it was sold, right, for him to buy other matters, etc. And of course, the Gupta emperors wouldn't show that they are merely killing deers, right? They would be slaying tigers and rhinoceros, which are actually represented on the coins. But we know that hunting was a major sport. Hunting was a sport not merely for the kings, but for the upper classes, right? Kalidas, for example, says, what is a greater source of pleasure than Bidhanti Lakshe Chale? Something which is moving, right? You've been able to pierce that. That is moving. What gives you a greater thrill than that? There is a very significant omission, and I've not been able to understand the reason for that, because milk and milk products are scarcely mentioned. Now, we know that for millennia, milk was being used and other milk products such as curd, yogurt, was being used and so on. Why such scanty reference? That doesn't mean that it was temporarily got into disuse. No, most definitely not. We are only permitted to talk about it to the extent that they are mentioned in the texts.
Except in the Ayurvedic texts, again,
Yeah.
all sorts of milks
Yeah.
with their various properties.
And ghees.
Yeah. And of course, even in Kamandaka's Nitisar, pasture is one of the 7 sources of revenue, just like in Arthashastra.
Yeah.
So, of course, there are pastures, there are pastoral people who are tending cattle, and that is a source of revenue for the state. So, we can understand that the use of milk is not discontinued, but somehow it did not catch the fancy of the authors.
The Gupta age was a period of illustrious rulers, exquisite artworks, and unparalleled literary genius. However, it was also a period of severe social inequality, restricted access to the cultural capital of the elite, and strategic patterns of governance and patronage of religion. It was a period that witnessed genuine transformation with the growth of agriculture, a new aesthetic and architectural vocabulary, and a number of tongues from Prakrit to Tamil. Writers such as Fashian shift our focus away from the royal court to monasteries and ordinary neighborhoods and remind us that history is not only written in royal inscriptions. Talking of this age as classical and not golden is a way of acknowledging with honesty its achievements and its limitations. In fact, it is a way of glorifying the genius of that age without forgetting that there were also people who were left out of its most spectacular achievements.